Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar today on citizen science in BC's provincial parks. My name is Lena Rachelson and I'm stepping in on behalf of my colleagues Elena Chia and Kate Murphy, who normally run these webinars on behalf of the Fraser Basin Council. I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh Nations in Vancouver. And my colleague Shannon, who did a lot of the planning around this event, is joining from Westminster on the traditional territories of the Kikai and more broadly the Coast Salish. And thank you to all for joining this event and for the territories that you're hailing from today. This webinar has been brought to you by the BC Regional Adaptation Collaborative, which supports local governments, Indigenous nations, and industries in planning for climate change resilience. We also have a website which you can visit called Retooling for Climate Change to find climate preparedness resources and funding and events, as you can see here on the right picture. And we also ask that you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can access from the website there. We'll also be posting a recording of the session about a week after the event. So make sure to visit our past events page on our website to access this, and as well as any slides. And just to go over some quick webinar logistics in case you're not so familiar with the GoToWebinar platform. Of course, please keep yourself muted. There's a button on the top right to keep your audio muted throughout the session, so do that. You'll also notice that there's a chat panel and a questions panel. So for the ease of the presenters today and their preference, please add your presentation related questions to the chat. And please refrain from using the questions panel for the webinar, or your questions might be missed. So again, keep those questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring those, and we'll get to a Q&A period after both presentations. In addition, if you're running into technical difficulties, please email fraserbasin@gmail.com, and we'll try and get those technical issues resolved for you. So, getting to the content of the webinar today, I'm really excited that today's webinar is coming just in time for the end of winter and the beginning of spring, a time that many of us will be getting back into nature and more involved in perhaps tracking local ecology. So today we're joined by two fantastic panelists, Jennifer Grant, a protected areas ecologist, who's working on building up BC Parks' climate change adaptation capacity through her work on the Living Lab for Climate Change and Conservation program. And then we'll also be hearing from John Reynolds, an SFU professor in biological sciences, and Tom Buell, BC Leadership Chair in Salmon Conservation, as well as the chair of the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. And with that, I'll pass it on to Jennifer to deliver the presentation.
Good morning. How's the sound?
Sounds good to me.
Great. Thanks so much for the invitation, Helena and Shannon. And finding my notes here. My name is Jen Grant, and I'm an ecologist at BC Parks. And I'm here today with Dr. John Reynolds from SFU to talk to you about the BC Parks iNaturalist project. It's a collaborative effort involving Simon Fraser University, University of Victoria, BC Parks, and the BC Park Foundation. So I'm going to start today's webinar with sharing some slides and background on the project and why BC Parks decided to support this work. Then I'll turn it over to John and let him introduce himself at that point. But before we dive in, I'm grateful to be joining you today from my home on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, specifically Wasanich territory, or Saanich. As a grateful guest to these lands, I feel I have a responsibility to continue to listen and learn from Indigenous people, to help dismantle structures that perpetuate the status quo and create spaces that are inclusive, respectful, and honor Indigenous peoples. So just some broad context. I'm getting screens mixed up here. BC Parks is responsible for the management and conservation of a system of more than 1,000 ecological reserves, provincial parks, conservancies, protected areas, and rec areas located throughout BC. Provincial parks cover about 14% of the province, including 13,000 campsites and 6,000 kilometers of trails. And we are lucky in BC to have the third largest park system in North America, after Canada's national parks and the United States National Park Service. And people love these parks, so much so. 2020 really put parks into the spotlight. People were drawn to parks for respite, recreation, and community after extended periods of sheltering in place. And last year was likely one of the busiest periods on record for BC parks, with Google mobility data reporting 150 to 200% increases in park visits across BC last spring and summer. We're going to be doing a live demo in a little while, and John and I were curious about what your favorite provincial park is to visit. Maybe it's one nearby that you've frequented more than normal because of the pandemic. We're going to use that information in the demo, and so if you wouldn't mind putting your favorite provincial park into the chat box. Additional important context is that BC Parks is working to implement the Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples Act. And like the rest of BC and the globe, BC Parks are facing a number of climate risks. So it's safe to say that with the large number of parks, increasing visitation, increasing climate risk, new responsibilities, that it is a challenge to provide the necessary suite of resources to manage it all. And this is one key reason citizen science initiatives such as the iNaturalist project are increasingly valuable. So BC's network of protected areas provide a natural solution for climate change. And by that, I mean actions or places that protect and sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems, and that address societal challenges like climate change, while all at the same time providing benefits to both people and biodiversity. So parks are a great example of a natural solution. These natural solutions are an essential component to our overall global effort to achieve our climate change goals and bolster community resilience. And that's because they conserve biodiversity, they protect ecosystem services, they connect our landscapes, they help in the carbon storage dynamic, they build our knowledge and understanding. So not only do parks act as baselines from which to understand the complex ways in which climate change affects natural and cultural systems, Indigenous knowledge of protected areas gives us a more complete view of climate change and guides us in our choice of adaptation strategies. And of course, parks inspire us. They provide people with opportunities for recreation, exercise, and the renewing of spirit. Climate change, of course, threatens these functions and these values. And we know that the effects of climate change in parks and protected areas may be profound. Some of these photos show those profound events like flooding and wildfire. And of course, there's more subtle effects. Those gradual increases in temperature, shrinking glaciers, rising sea levels, changes to the water cycle. And these changes, while maybe not dramatic on a day-to-day basis, are affecting the distribution of species and the organization of ecosystems. So we really need to be actively monitoring and managing our parks. Climatic displacement is already underway throughout the BC's protected area system. Here's a look at how climate change is projected to result in major shifts in vegetation zones, or biogeoclimatic zones, as they're called, over the next century. This is looking at the province as a whole, but we suspect that biodiversity will follow these shifts, and some of this change is already being observed. We can see the green coastal western hemlock areas expanding over time. They've expanded into this time frame up to 2018, and we're seeing a loss in the white and the alpine over time as well. So we know that climate change is impacting our parks and the values our parks contain, whether they be conservation, recreational, cultural. And so BC Parks Conservation Program is focusing our activities around 5 key objectives. The first one, probably relevant to many of you, is the mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And as Helena mentioned in the introduction, we have a few various initiatives under this objective, including our Living Lab program, which provides seed funding to academic institutions so that they can conduct climate change-related research in our parks. And that's actually the avenue in which we first learned about the BC Parks iNaturalist project and first met John for the first time. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for BC Parks to learn more and be more resilient as an agency as we prepare for climate change. We have lots of activities under the other objectives, including the maintenance and restoration of ecosystems. Some of these actions have been made possible through our license plate program, whether that be wetland restoration in parks or cultural site restoration. We have work underway to protect and recover biodiversity, taking a closer look at-risk species such as the Taylor checker spot butterfly and white bark pine. And we work to create connections. So no single organization can tackle some of these big challenges alone. So we're committed to working with First Nations and other government and community partners to achieve our shared goals. And really what we're talking about today with the BC Parks iNaturalist project is really about knowing what we are protecting. And before we can take conservation action, we must know what BC's protected area system is protecting and understand the threats it is facing. So the information we need comes from traditional knowledge, ecological and social science research, and of course, citizen science, inventory, and monitoring. So a big part of knowing what we're protecting lies within these pieces that are in development. So we have our long-term ecological monitoring program, which aims to monitor ecological changes occurring across BC's landscape, from the marine and intertidal biome right up to the alpine and subalpine biome, and it's been in place for the last 10 years. A number of our LTEM monitoring stations are also reliant on volunteers and community partners, so we're very grateful for that. We conduct formal inventories when we can. We are working with UBC to set up a network of wildlife cameras to help understand wildlife shifts in certain parks. And of course, the citizen science work, which is really key and exciting. And that's the biggest piece of that is the project you're learning about today, the BC Parks iNaturalist project. And I should say that funding for much of this work comes from the license plate program. So if you are an owner of a BC Parks license plate, I would just like to say thank you. You can be assured that your contribution, your $40 a year contribution, is going to very good use. We funnel that funding through to 3 programs, so conservation, Indigenous relations, and community education and engagement. And then we also have a smaller program, the Living Lab Research Program, which is about providing seed funding to academic institutions to do climate change research. So main benefits and objectives of the BC Parks iNaturalist project is really we're getting inventory information for over 1,000 of our provincial parks. And this is information we wouldn't otherwise have, which is fantastic. We're also hoping that long-term, this will be data to understand changes, whether it be range shifts, the presence and absence of potentially threatened species and invasive species. This is really useful stuff. And then, of course, there's the public engagement component. So iNaturalist is an easy, free tool to get people excited about the biodiversity in their favorite parks. You don't need to know anything about nature to use the tool, and it can teach you a great deal if you're curious to try it. Someone wise once said, citizen science offers the power of science to everyone and the power of everyone's science. So I'll let John speak more to this as he reveals some impressive engagement numbers with his slides. And I'll pause there. Welcome any questions, or we can have questions at the end too. If there's anything burning that people want to ask about, happy to take something now. Okay, over to you, John.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jen. Can you hear me all right?
You sound good.
Okay, well, that's great. And so, yes, it's been a real pleasure working with Jen and the team at BC Parks, and also with my collaborator and co-organizer, Brian Starzomski from the University of Victoria, on this program, which is entering its 3rd summer now. And so I'm going to begin just by giving you a quick little overview of how iNaturalist works, and then I'll return to some slides and show you some of the results of our efforts. So I'm actually now on the iNaturalist website. So it's a free app. You can put it on your phone or use it on your computer. I tend to use the computer version more. And here is a map of all of the observations that have been put into iNaturalist around the world. You can see it has some pretty good global coverage, and we're now nearing 60 million observations in this platform. So the platform was created by people at the California Academy of Sciences, and they are administering it along with the National Geographic Society. And it's been around for a while, about 10 years, but in the last few years, it's really taken off exponentially. And the idea is that anyone, anywhere, can upload a photograph or an audio of any species of plant or animal or fungus, and it will be mapped here, and it will also be visible to other people to see it so that they can help you with the identification. If you don't know what it is, you could say it's a plant, and then experts can come in and provide support to you in figuring out what you have actually seen. So you can see the program is now over 300,000 species and an impressive number of people, almost 1.5 million observers. This is the largest number of observers of any of the world's citizen science projects. And all of the data from this are downloadable by scientists, and they also are sent to a UN-operated site, which is sort of like the mothership for all the different citizen science projects. So these data become available along with data from other platforms, such as eBird, for example, in the case of birds, or Bumblebee Watch is another example. These are all held together at the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So we found, I had a quick look at your favorite park. I'll come to that in a minute. I saw Manning. So I've got a feeling that's the one we'll be focusing on. One other thing is if people would like to just pop into the chat any species of plant or animal that comes to mind. So I'll probably take the first one I see. And so if anybody would like to type one in, and if nobody chimes in too quickly, can put Helena maybe on the spot, and you can throw your favorite or least favorite plant or animal into the chat, and we'll do some exploring. Lady slipper. Okay, let's do lady slipper. There are a few species of lady slippers, but let's just try typing in lady slipper. And so there they are. Let's do pink lady slipper. So it's offered me all these different types of lady slippers. You see, I didn't even get a chance to finish typing the name. Let's do pink lady slipper. There it is. It's an Eastern North American species. And I can zoom in on it on the map. Let's try not to go to Africa. There we go. You can see its distribution pretty nicely here. We have low coverage up here. It may fill in that gap eventually in the lower boreal forest in the prairies, but there's a pretty good idea of where it's found. And I could click on any of these observations and it'll show it to me. So here's one from Quebec. I can look at it. There it is. So this person who in total has put in over 11,000 observations of everything to Naturalist has come up. There's a very good photo, and you can see that two people have agreed with the identification of this species, and that means that once you have agreement with it, then it gets a banner, the so-called research grade, meaning that people agree with it, and people can be pretty confident now that this is what it is. If someone wants to think it's something else, they can say that, or they could comment on it, and so on. And you can see when it was observed. It was 18th of June 2018, and it was submitted a week later. And so you can put in any old photos you have. The main thing is that you do need a location and a date for it. So that's how that works. And there are other ways in which I can look at these. So I'm going to just get out of that particular species, and I'll just point out, I'm going to briefly show you the three key buttons up here. So explore is similar to that's pretty much where we were. Now I've happened to have restricted it to Canada. So that's where we could type lady slipper and see the species. So that takes care of the explore button. And there are lots of things you can do with that button. You can view things as a grid. You don't have to just see them as a map. So if we wanted to look at Douglas fir, for example, there's the map on this big wide screen. It scrunches things together, but there's our map. But I could also just go to a grid view, and these are the most recently uploaded Douglas firs. This one was uploaded 19 hours ago, 17 hours ago, 18 hours ago, 2 days ago. And the ones that have got the research grade mean people have gone in and agreed with them. So lots to play with in that button, explore. If you go to your observations, that's what it sounds like. You can see a list of the things that you've seen most recently. So here's an invasive plant that I put in from a few days ago. It'll tell you how many observations you've made, number of species, and again, you can see your own observations mapped from around the world. And you can, as I said, you can just scroll through, and sometimes, for example, I often will forget the name of a plant or insect, but you can often figure it out by typing in the species name. And if you know where you were, you could say, in my case, Greater Vancouver. So I could type, let's do Arctic skipper, or well, in this case, this is one where I would know, but there they are. These are two observations I made, and I think these were both, one of them at least was in Vancouver, but if I didn't know, I could just type skippers. There's the family, and again, if I knew it was in Vancouver, I could restrict the search to there, and then you could just scroll through, and there they all are, and I can see which one jogs my memory as to which species it was. I could also just see them by species. So I've seen 8 woodland skippers, 5 European, and an Arctic skipper. So that's how the your observations works. It's a way of keeping track of what you've seen. The last one I want to mention is community. In particular, I want to talk about projects. So a project is in most cases a geographical location that captures all of the observations automatically that have ever been put there. And so you can see some examples of some of the projects. These are on the banner page of iNaturalist.ca, but this is where I want to go with Manning, because people, the first 3 people that answered the chat about their favorite parks wrote Manning. So I will search Manning, and it'll offer me some names that fit. EC Manning Provincial Park is where we're going. So I'll click on Manning, and here you can see all the observations that have ever been made there. And so here's a banner photo we created as part of this program with BC Parks. We created all of these projects. There's a blurb, you can read about them. You can if you read more, you'll see a link to the to a website that BC Parks maintains about each of their parks. And you can see we've got 10,000 observations. So, oops, just lost it somehow. 10,000 observations. So you're not the only ones who apparently like Manning. And just over 1,000 species, and 392 people have contributed observations. You can see the map there. There's Manning, and these are the observations that have been put into Manning. And so we could click on any of those, or we could do a grid view, and there's many. You have all the options that I just showed you under Explore can be restricted to a single one of these parks. So there's a few areas of Manning that have not been explored, probably because they don't have trails, but you can see people have been pretty adventuresome in doing this in Manning. Now there's one other thing, well, 2 other things I'll just mention about this. First, before I forget, if a species is endangered or is potentially could be subject to poaching or persecution, then iNaturalist will usually automatically obscure the exact location. So this is a way to protect species in a public database like this. So if they want to worry, if they're concerned about collectors, for example, there are some species which will be obscured automatically. That's a work in progress, but it's something you should always bear in mind, is thinking about whether you think there could be any risks of people trying to catch or collect or kill certain species. The last thing I want to do before I go to my slides, is to tell you about, again, more directly about the BC Parks iNaturalist program. Under community, go back and search projects again. We have another kind of project, which is an umbrella project, which, as the name suggests, it brings the observations together from multiple projects. So if I type BC Parks, it autofills because I was there not long ago. I'll hit the go button. This might take a second to load because it's a lot of material in here. But this is the umbrella project for all 1,034 protected areas managed by the province of BC. So here it is. So you can see some of the numbers as they come in. We've had almost 5,000 observers now and 272,000 observations. Here's the leaderboard. Strathcona actually has the most observations, followed by Manning. And there's a few others, protected areas, Goldstream, not too surprising. That's by observations. I can also look by species. I can see them all if you really wanted to. If I hit view more, it'll go right down the leaderboard to the least of the parks with the fewest observations. I can also look at this by species. Strathcona winning on the species count as well. So this is basically the home landing page that brings all of these parks together. There's so many of them that you obviously can't even see the names of them all. And here are the recent observations and a journal. There's the last thing we wrote. Let's finish off the summer with a big push. That was last year. So that's our umbrella project. This is the one that brings all of the information together. And then it means that people like Jen and her team and others working for provincial agencies, federal agencies, can very quickly see different species in the different parks, all brought under this single roof. So I'll leave it at that. And I'm going to now just go to my slides. Okay, and if one of the organizers wants to just pop into the chat or confirm that you can see everything okay, that will be reassuring. And I'll just continue on and finish things up with a few slides. Okay, thanks. So I'm good to go. So I just want to step back again and look at this amazing platform, iNaturalist. Here you can see the observations. I've just plotted them for the last 5 years, and their numbers of observations are going up exponentially. And the number of observations almost doubled last year compared to all of the previous years combined. So this axis actually goes back to back another 5 years, but the numbers are so small that you won't even see them. So it really is going up rapidly. It's catching on. It's being used in a lot of different contexts, both for fun and for scientific information. And that's one reason we chose this as the platform for this program, and in basically trying to find out what is in our provincial protected areas. So before our first field season, when we first set all of this up, here's May 2019. Here are the, you can see we had 17,000 observations by 1,000 people. So those are observations that that all of us, members of the public, everyone had put into iNaturalist that happened to have fallen in a park. And you can see this is a pretty good number, 17,000. But just to put that into perspective, remember, we now have over 10,000 just in Manning alone. This is from the umbrella. This is for all of the observations. And so as of about a week ago, we are now up to 271,000 observations. And now we've quadrupled the number of observers, which is really nice. So this is where the engagement side of this program seems to be really taking off. And so we've grown by 250,000 species in less than 2 years that have been picked up by this program. some of these are, many of these are ones that we and the teams that we've hired using the funds that Jen mentioned from, for example, the license plate program, that they've generated them directly. We've sent out teams of usually students each year to do this, but most of them are not from us. They are from members of the public. And so I'll just give you an idea of some of the ways in which this is providing inventories and hopefully moving toward helping to establish the type of baseline that Jen spoke about so that we can monitor change in these parks. And as she mentioned, this is intended in part to supplement some of the information from the more structured surveys, such as the long-term sites that are being monitored. So here's a very common, it is a common lichen, script lichen. You don't even notice it actually until you might just think it's breaks in the bark of an aspen or something, but if you zoom in, it's kind of cool. It does look like a script. And there's how many we had on May 1st when we were just before we started the field work. And here's how many we have now in British Columbia, okay? So suddenly we're getting an idea of where in fact this very common lichen is. So that's just an example of the information that has come in to the program over the last 2 years. And then you get all sorts of wonderful things. The grig, if that doesn't mean anything to you, it is a crazy grasshoppery thing, and a really cool looking thing. It's like a cross between a giant cricket and a giant grasshopper. And there were the observations that we had in May in 2019, and now we've extended their range greatly for where we know that. And these are all in parks. All of these observations are in parks. There are actually 2 species of these fantastic things. Butterflies and moths. So here we are on May 1st. These were the observations, and here is where we stand today with the numbers, with the distributions of butterflies and moths. We've really done well. When I say we, I mean the collective of the thousands of people that are contributing observations. We've done quite well, especially in the south here in the southern interior, which is where there are an awful lot of very interesting and in some cases threatened species of butterflies and moths. We're going to do a lot more work on moths this summer. And then we can look at threatened species. And this is a big push that we're really emphasizing now increasingly. And here, again, we have the before and after. So before we started, we had 1,300 observations. Now we're up to over 6,000 observations of threatened species in BC parks. And then introduced species. So iNaturalist automatically tags a species as being native or non-native. It knows. We don't have to tell it. It actually queries databases automatically. So this is about 3 clicks of your keypad to generate a map like this. And so here we are. Beforehand, we had 1,500 observations and now over 14,000, unfortunately, of these species. And one of the things that we've been hearing is that many people, including park operators and managers, are interested in finding out where the threatened species are. And in particular, we will often hear when we go into a campground, the operator will say, well, there's something over here you should see. I've never seen this before. And that in many cases then helps to provide an early warning system of novel threatened species, which might be controlled or managed before they gain a foothold. So this is a very important baseline that we're trying to firm up. And here are just some examples. I won't go into it, but a number of examples where, again, you can see how much this map has changed over the last 2 years. So this summer, we're sending out 2 teams of 3 people. We have funding with funding from BC Parks, as well as the Sitka Foundation and a couple of other sources, including UVic and SFU. And they are getting the summer of a lifetime because they'll be camping in BC Parks, and they will be photographing everything in sight. And these are extremely skilled naturalists. We had 205 applications for the positions that we filled this year. We are emphasizing threatened species more than in the past, and we're actually hoping to double the observations if we can, almost double them this year, if possible. Here are Thomas and Lena last year with a UV light and looking for moths on a sheet. And so simple. If you would like to get engaged, if you see it, photograph it and upload it. It's pretty simple. You can do it from your phone if you want to. I use my phone as a camera as well as other cameras, and I tend to download them to my laptop and then do bulk uploads. It's very fast. And a key thing is that if you're using, it's easiest to use your phone because then you can have the location services turned on, which means that iNaturalist will automatically have the location. You don't have to put it on a map. It maps it automatically. And it will also have the date and the time that will go with the photo. And if you don't know what it is, you can ask iNaturalist. It has a very good photo recognition system where it will suggest what species it looks like. It works better for certain groups than others. You can have some bloopers for sure. They're only suggestions, but it's a artificial intelligence system that is learning all the time how to recognize species, and it's a great tool to get you started on figuring out what you might have seen. So I just want to acknowledge some members of the team as well as our funders. So this is the collaborator here here's Brian Starzomski from UVic, my partner in all of this research, and a very friendly dog that, fortunately, that we bumped into this last summer. And then there's this is last year's team. Jason, Kate here is our program manager, so she's still working for us right through the winter, and she's helping us set up the plans for next summer. And Lena, as well as Thomas, with all of his crazy insect photographing gear. So it really has been a pleasure to work not only with these people, but again, just with all of the people that have been enthused and our supporters in BC Parks. We strategize a lot. We talk about priorities, and occasionally they're able to come and join us in the field. Jen has been able to do that, and we're looking forward to a terrific season, which is actually going to start in 1 month. So we're still in the planning phase, but we're very excited as the season changes to know that our field season is going to be starting quite soon. So with that, I will unshare my screen so I can find out how. No, that didn't do it.
Thank you so much, John. I just wanted to thank John for his presentation today and live demo, but also for his leadership along with Dr. Brian Starzomski at UVic for their countless hours in getting this project up and running. Building those individual iNaturalist projects for over 1,000 parks is an extreme amount of effort, so thank you. And also thanks to the new program coordinator, Kate McGowan, who might be on the call today. So great crew. They have the absolute best job ever in the summer. I'm totally jealous.
And I'll just interject, if the organizers can you intervene to stop the share? I'm not seeing that option right now on my control panel.
I don't see you sharing your screen anymore, so it might have worked.
Oh, okay.
If Shannon can just verify, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yes. All right, so at this point, we're ready for our Q&A, and I already see that there's quite a few questions for our panelists in the chat. And firstly, I just want to thank again John and Jennifer for that really fantastic and detailed walkthrough of the platform. And it's really great to see that there's been huge uptake of the platform with all those observations being made in recent months and a year. So I'm just gonna monitor the chat here to see which questions we have. So we had one about threatened species. How are you defining threatened species? Because of data deficiencies, you might be eliminating 99% of arthropods if you use the official definition.
That's a very good question. You can still hear me okay? So, well, you're asking the right person, because I'm the chair of the federal committee, CSIWIC, that assesses the status of Canada's threatened species for the Minister of the Environment for potential protection under the Species at Risk Act. So this is actually something I think about a lot. With arthropods, it's very difficult. We have far more arthropods. So I'm now actually sounding like the chair of CSIWIC. We have more arthropods that we would like to assess, then we're able to because of resources. So the group of people on Kasuik who do arthropods are certainly very busy, and they have a long list of candidate species. So the short answer, how do we define the ones that are threatened? I mean, right now it's based on either provincial or federal or global status. And that is actually still a bit of a work in progress with iNaturalist. There are some glitches. It's not actually, it doesn't work perfectly well, what they describe as being threatened and what actually is threatened. There's just some database issues there. But indeed, we just don't have the information to know about the status of a lot of arthropods, and the same is true for mosses as well as lichens. And so there may be more threatened. So so far we just deal with the ones that we know have got some sort of status.
Great, and we have another question. How, if at all, has the BC Conservation Data Centre been incorporating iNat data into their database?
Do you want to answer that, Jen, or I can take a crack at it?
Yeah, I mean, we have been having ongoing conversations, and we're hoping to bring them into the fold more this year, but certainly we're communicating a lot and they're keen on the project. But we do need to, we're working to coordinate a bit better on that.
Yes, we have two, and they are actually organizing 2 trips this summer where they have invited us and the team to go with them to 2 priority areas where they would like more information. So, it is actually, we've been scheming quite a lot with the Conservation Data Center.
Great. We also have a question from Kevin, I believe. Are there any ways to infer abundance as well as distribution of species without using confirmation from formal inventories? The number of observations would seem to depend partly on many people looking in a given area. It's a great question. I'll hand it over to you both.
Sure. So we've been working on this a bit, and it is, iNaturalist unfortunately does not have an automatic field where you can record abundance. And I can think of some reasons for that. There's certain taxa where it doesn't really make sense. If somebody puts up a photograph of salal and you're going to say abundance, right? It could be thousands, and it is somewhat haphazard. It's not like eBird, where birders can keep track of how many song sparrows they saw when they were out for 2 hours in a given walk, and they can collect that information, and it works very well, I think. So what we're doing is, the key is to know how much search effort there is. And so if every, something like that lady slipper, it's going to be probably over photographed because it's beautiful, and people are going to be going for it more than the moss that might have been growing beside it. But we've been working on some tools with some collaborators to actually pull out an indication of search effort by looking at individual people's interests and the extent to which that biases what they put in. And it is also possible to see how long a person has been, because it's date and time stamped and we know the locations, it's actually possible to have a pretty good idea of the amount of effort they put in during that day. And so we're working on ways of trying to dig this out. It's possible to do it, but it is definitely not as easy as if it were a structured survey. That's why it complements it. It will never replace those kinds of structured, consistent surveys. I'll give you a flavor of one of the things that we've discovered. Brian Starzomsky and I are co-supervising a master's student, Ellen Gertz, who has found that about 80% of observations in iNaturalist are within about 750 meters of a road. So there's an immediate confirmation of the sort of bias for where people are getting the observations, and we're doing some work on refining that and understanding how representative that might be compared to observations that are further from a road. Of course, you could also ask, if you threw a dart at a map of BC, how many times would it land that close to a road? And I think the answer is more often than you think. But anyway, this is the kind of quantitative thing we're working on.
Thank you for that question. There's 2 that relate to invasive species, which is also quite relevant in the conversation of climate change. So is there a way to flag an invasive species to an area in each observation. And then there's another question asking about whether this has helped document the range of invasives.
I think, do you want me to answer that, Jen, or?
Sure, yeah.
So the first question was, can you flag an invasive species in a location? Was that the first part, Helena?
To an area in each observation.
So each observation is mapped. So you can definitely find all of the invasives that have ever been put in for a given location, a given region, and so on. So I don't know if that answers it, but that's certainly doable. And the other one was, have we documented the spread of endangered threatened species in relation to climate, or just in general? Was that?
The range of invasive species, if you've been able to document that.
Well, yes. We've improved our knowledge of that a lot. Absolutely. And we've certainly found lots of invasive species in places where they had not previously been known. And we have actually, spoken with people. We gave a talk just before COVID. There was the annual meeting of the Invasive Species Council of BC, where we talked about options for how to use this sort of information. So I would say we're still at the collecting a baseline stage, because it's going to take a while. We've only really just gotten going, and so it's going to be a few years before you can really compare before and after iNaturalist program started. And again, accounting for differences in the number of observers will be important when we do that.
And the tool itself in the app, it'll indicate if it's a invasive species too. It'll immediately identify it as such. So you can filter for those when you're using the desktop application. And yeah, certainly last summer, I think the team found some new invasive species in the Okanagan that was really key information for us, because now we can go up there and deal with it. But yeah, we're not systematically able to survey all of our parks for invasive species, so this is just another tool to help us kind of monitor.
So we have another question here. How can iNaturalist best be used in documenting urban biodiversity? Seems to have value for developing better diversity policies, and the person is thinking specifically of resilient sandage and that initiative.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets people excited about the biodiversity in their backyard. It helps them understand what's there, and certainly that's information that Saanich can use to then do exactly what we've been talking about, potentially identify new infestations of invasive species or invasive fauna, or it could be used just to document the phenological shifts and changes in plants that are native. So I think it's just added value and added information that resilient Saanich could use as it rolls out its plans.
We have a question from someone working for a local government who's promoting iNaturalist, or the government is promoting iNaturalist as a means for the community to become more engaged with nature and help collect biodiversity indicator data. And this individual is wondering how to best deal with species at risk observations. From a management and regulatory compliance standpoint, there are times when it's important to know exactly where the observation was found so that they can avoid conflicts through the development permitting process. So it seems that there's no way to really know the occurrence, that if there's an occurrence, it's actually in a vulnerable location.
Right, and so this is because the location may be obscured if it's a threatened species. So this is still a work in progress. Right now, well, a couple of things. First of all, not all threatened species have their locations obscured. It's up till recently, it was only in BC, there was a list provided by the Conservation Data Center of the species, of a subset of the threatened species, that they actually wanted to hide the locations because they thought they could be subject to harm, because people might go and look for them and collect them or kill them. So it wasn't all threatened species. That is changing now, and there has been a big push, which is still literally read about this yesterday. There has been a push to try to harmonize across the provinces and territories the criteria that they use for hiding observations. So the short answer is I would recommend to this person, I can't see the chat, so I'm sorry I haven't been able to see any names or anything. I would go to the Conservation Data Center. They have a way to get exact coordinates of species, even if the location has been obscured by the filters that they've told iNaturalist to put in. So that's my answer would be to talk to the conservation data centers. And you know, I understand this trade-off, right? Because if you're going to protect it, you have to know where it is, but then there may be certain species where you just simply cannot let the general public know where they are because it could come to harm. So this is a balancing act that the conservation data center is working on.
Okay, we have a question. Can you elaborate on your outreach to First Nations and who's the best contact if a First Nation would like to get more information regarding this program and how to get involved?
Right, well, I can.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Okay, well, I mean, certainly feel free to reach out to me. I think my email can be shared in the chat. Go ahead, Helena, if you want to do that. And yeah, we've had some outreach with First Nations to join the field teams. Last year was a little different because of the restrictions in communities and just closures of parks and everything else that happened. But yeah, that's certainly our long-term intent. And I know John's got some plans in the works potentially for this year. Do you want to speak to those, John?
Yes, yes, as Jen said, everything kind of fell apart. There are many regions that we did not visit because of closures of the traditional territories to keep COVID out, and so that kind of knocked our plans sideways last year. But we have done some dedicated surveys in a number of traditional territories with the support of local people, and we are definitely hoping that we can sort of break a bit more free of COVID restrictions this year and do a better job of it. But we totally would love to, if people would like to reach out. Our team has some flexibility about where we go. So the schedule is sort of forming up now for the first couple of blocks of the summer, but we have had wonderful interactions with local communities, biodiversity groups, and biologists and so on, where they come out with us and they show us things, and so we'd be very receptive to that. So if Jen's happy being an initial point of contact, that would be great.
Sorry, we've got quite a few questions here, which is not a bad problem to have. There's some questions about the Seek app that I'm just trying to find, as folks were interested in that, as opposed to using iNaturalist. So someone here says, I've been using the Seek app for the last year. As an adult, should I switch over to iNaturalist so that the data can be fed back into the system? What if I'm using it for kids?
Right, so Seek is, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a phone app that has been developed by the iNaturalist people, and it is largely aimed at education and kids and so on. It has better privacy options and so on, and it's used for identifying species on your phone. It's pretty amazing. It uses the same artificial intelligence algorithm, and so you can literally hold up your phone, point it at something, and it suggests what it is. You don't even have to push a button. You could scan like this across a bunch of plants, and it'll offer name. And so I think Seek does have a niche, and I mean, the answer is you could continue using that. But if you use iNaturalist itself, then you take the photo, and then you can upload it to the platform, and then it becomes goes into your observations, and everybody else can see it. Depending on, there's a generational difference here. So I'm at the generation where I don't like to use my phone for a lot of things other than taking photos in the field. And sometimes I make phone calls on it even. But if you want to if you're going to take quite a few photos, you could download them from your phone onto your laptop, and then you can drag and drop a bunch all at once onto the platform. That's how I prefer to do it, but many people can just take the photo with their phone using iNet, hit the upload button, and you're done.
So I'll be taking one final question here before we close the session. And also just to mention that Jennifer's contact has been added to the chat, so just look for that, and we'll be sharing the contact information of the organizers at the end as well. What are the best ways that you have found to spread the word about BC Parks iNaturalist project to the general public?
Well, we've done some social media. We have been lucky that John and Brian have been providing updates to the broader iNaturalist community through the iNaturalist platform. And we tell all of our staff, we train our rangers and student rangers on using this tool. So we hope that when they are interacting with park users that they can mention it. I think that's probably the main ways. We have a video coming soon, so they'll be sharing that. Yeah, mostly social media and just staff on the ground.
Great, and I see that we have many other questions that haven't been answered, so we'll be trying to, I think our organizers are going to download some of those questions, and hopefully we can get to some of them in a follow-up. I'm just gonna quickly share my screen to get, oh, that was not correct. Sorry about that, folks. So yes, thank you so much to both of our panelists for joining us today and for answering all those questions in depth. Thanks also to our very attentive and engaged audience for joining this webinar. I just wanted to quickly share the emails of two of my colleagues from the BC Climate Adaptation Collaborative in case you're interested in following up about this event and contacting any of our panelists, or inquiring anything related to the BC Regional Climate Adaptation Collaborative. So thank you so much, and I wish you a great rest of your day.